We have new information today that the FBI warned then-candidate Donald Trump that Russians might try to infiltrate his campaign. This exclusive reporting by Ken Dilianian, who joins us here shortly, reveals that the FBI counterintelligence briefings, quote, were timed to occur around the period when the candidates started receiving classified intelligence, officials said, which put them at greater risk for being targeted by foreign spies. It goes on to say, quote, by the time of the warning in late July or August, at least 7 Trump campaign officials had been in contact with Russians or people linked to Russia, according to public reports. There is no public evidence the campaign reported any of that to the FBI. We're also getting new details about a conversation between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's the second time the two men have spoken in 4 days. The Washington Post putting it this way tonight. The White House did something very unusual Sunday, releasing details of a call between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin that included information about U.S. intelligence that was shared to foil a terrorist plot in Russia. The wording of this official readout statement that the White House traditionally puts out after a phone call like this one was a departure from traditional language we're used to seeing, and to some people, as you'll see, it sounded familiar. Quote, President Putin extended his thanks and congratulations to CIA Director Mike Pompeo and the CIA. President Trump then called Director Pompeo to congratulate him, his very talented people, and the entire intelligence community on a job well done, exclamation mark. That's why we said it was familiar to some people. James Clapper, a veteran of the intelligence business, the former director of national intelligence in the Obama administration, shared his thoughts on CNN today about Putin's motive here.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. You have to remember Putin's background. He's a KGB officer. That's what they do. They recruit assets. And I think some of that experience and instincts of Putin has come into play here in his managing a pretty important account for him, if I could use that term, with our president.
That was chilling. Here to talk about all of it, the aforementioned Ken Dilianian, NBC News intelligence and national security reporter. And Robert Costa is back with us, national political reporter for the Washington Post and, of course, moderator of Washington Week on PBS, also an MSNBC political analyst. Ken, our job here is to send folks to bed informed. So throw caution to the wind and throw your usual modesty out the window and tell us what they should know, the chief takeaway from your own reporting today.
Sure, Brian, and this is with my colleagues Carol Lee and Julia Ainsley. We spent a while trying to dig this story out, and really there are 2 layers to this counterintelligence briefing that we're reporting on. This was a standard high-level classified counterintelligence briefing given to both candidates, we are told, shortly after they were officially nominated at their conventions. And it was tied to their first intelligence briefings. And it was designed to tell them that they are now targets of foreign adversaries. Well, of course, Hillary Clinton had been Secretary of State. She had had many of these kinds of briefings. This wasn't news to her. It would have been the first time, though, that Donald Trump would be getting a briefing like this. But there was also something else going on right at this time, Brian. The FBI was learning from the CIA and from other sources that there had been a pattern of contacts between members of the Trump campaign and Russia, and they were starting a counterintelligence investigation. And what our sources are telling us, it's very unlikely that they would have wanted to compromise that investigation by telling Donald Trump and the people around him in that briefing too much about what they knew. At the same time, they did feel like they had a duty to warn and try to protect the Republican nominee for president and explain to him that he could take steps to protect his campaign and also to put him on notice that he could inform the FBI, that he should inform the FBI if there were any suspicious overtures going forward. And what we really don't know, Brian, is how President Trump reacted and what he did subsequently about any information he received about Russian contacts.
And Robert Costa, that brings us to you. Reporters and law enforcement are normally obsessed with timelines because it takes us back. We match it against the calendar. In businesses like ours, we can match it against contemporaneous newscasts, newspapers, file video. So, Robert, remind us what was going on then.
Well, during the Trump campaign, he was the Republican nominee, and he was pursuing a totally different kind of perspective, a policy on Russia than we've seen in the mainstream of the Democratic Party or within the Republican Party. And that is what has made him such an outlier when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. Members of the intelligence community are at times appalled, as former Director Clapper is, at this relationship, this new kind of relationship with Russia. But inside of the White House, they remain defiant about it.
And Robert, stress to our audience how unusual this Trump-Putin business is just in these last, 4 business days. These calls are usually preceded by some staff work. They are events in the Kremlin and White House. They are studied for and picked apart later. This was unusual, and this almost clearly dictated readout statement to follow.
It is very unusual. If you look at American presidents in the past, if they've had frequent calls with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, we don't bat an eye in the press or in the both major political parties. At the same time, because of the long-standing hostility with the former Soviet Union, then with some Russian leaders in the last 20, 25 years, this kind of relationship is outside of the norm. And you're seeing President Trump really challenging the foreign policy establishment, and he's really pushing his party to the brink. So many Republicans I speak to on Capitol Hill wonder about this relationship, but the White House believes that they can reimagine U.S. foreign policy, but there are strains in that effort within the GOP.